Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of the Bible in 1 Year with the Preacher's Husband. Today we're going through Isaiah chapter 13 through 17, and tomorrow we're going to do Isaiah chapter 18 through 22. Now, right off the bat today, chapter 13 starts out with a pronouncement against Babylon. There's a lot of judgment, and I'll tell you, these chapters that we're reading today, they emphasize sin, a call to repentance, and judgment, just like this theme all the way through about chapter 39 or 40 or so. They have this similar theme throughout, and this is no different. Now, Babylon, although it wasn't like this major world power or anything, they were kind of obscure on the world scene as far as that goes in the time period, but Babylon does play a very significant role in the judgment of God's people in Judah. Babylon represented, how should I say it, kind of a cultural arrogance, or they represented human self-reliance. So if you look at Babylon from that perspective, that's what they represented here in the Bible. A couple of things stuck out to me in chapter 13, verse 6 and verse 9. Well, for the day of the Lord is near. That was the first of verse 6. And the first of verse 9 says, look, the day of the Lord is coming. Now, that's only 2 times in the entire book of Isaiah does it mention the day of the Lord. And there they are right there. So I thought that was interesting. Also, if you look at verse 8, chapter 13, verse 8, it says, they will be horrified. Pain and agony will seize them. They will be in anguish like a woman in labor. Where have we heard that before? Isaiah here, he uses this theme of a woman in labor as a graphic image of the pain and distress that will result from God's warring activity. And that was a very similar image to what we just read about in Micah as well. Remember Micah chapter 4, and then later on in Micah, I believe it was chapter 6, when he referred to it again. So Babylon is not looking too good at the moment. If you wonder where Babylon was, it is in where modern day Iraq. So if you look at right in the square in the middle where the word Iraq is, look a little bit south of Iraq, you see Baghdad, and a little south of Baghdad, you see Babylon. That is where ancient Babylon physically was. We get to chapter 14, and there's this kind of a blurb here about Israel's return that was almost out of place. It was a pronouncement that anticipated the restoration of God's people. Like I said, it's right in the middle of the destruction and the downfall of Babylon. It seems awkward and out of place, but Babylon's fall correlates with the rise of a restored Judah. So this restoration actually provides the context for the taunt song that comes next against Babylon's king in verses 4 through 21. So if that puts a little perspective there as to why they put that little blurb about Israel's return, it was to provide context for this taunt. And then, of course, Assyria will be destroyed. Wow. There's a lot of pronouncements at this point. Lots of pronouncements about what's going on. Now, I put this post up here. It says the Palestine Post. And this was when the state of Israel was born. All right, and I'll give you an opportunity. You can pause it, go full screen, and maybe read some of this, or you can look it up online. I found that to be some very interesting reading about the war that was going on with the Israelis and the Palestinians and how it kind of came about and how the state of Israel was born. And it wasn't really that many years ago, if you think about it. And of course, we continue on with this in chapter 14 with a pronouncement against Philistia. Now, this is the first in a series of pronouncements against nations that were immediate neighbors of Israel. So these were the surrounding nations around Israel. And this was Isaiah's, the prophet Isaiah, pronouncing these as this is what God has spoken to him. A pronouncement against Moab came next. That was the second in the series. And then that goes all the way through chapter 16, verse 14. And then we get to a pronouncement directed against Damascus. Now, Damascus was an ancient city, and it was the capital of Syria. And then we move on in chapter 17 to judgment against Israel. Now, these three verses, 4, 5, and 6, were basically three different images of destruction that we got in about the destruction of Israel. And it actually gave me some hope. It really did. It actually gave me hope. And the hope I found in it was in verse 6, chapter 17, verse 6. It says here, only gleanings will be left in Israel, as if an olive tree had been beaten. 2 or 3 olives at the very top of the tree, 4 or 5 on its fruitful branches. This is the declaration of the Lord, the God of Israel. Now, face value, that sounds horrible. It sounds like, oh my goodness, it's just going to take all of the fruit. It's all going to be destroyed. Well, this third image of destruction concerns the harvesting of an olive tree. And it was shaken, and of course, when you shake this olive tree, all of the fruit falls off, and everything that's fallen on the ground is eaten. But this image also shows that though this devastation will be very extensive, it will not be total. It will not be complete eradication. In fact, a remnant, represented by the olives that stayed attached to the tree, will survive. So, not all of Israel is going to be destroyed. There will be a remnant left. And of course, it ends with the judgment against the nations. I hope this has touched you. I hope it's given you some hope, even though we sat here and read about all this pain and destruction and all of these pronouncements against these different countries and even against Israel. Live like an olive, guys. Live like an olive. We're going to make it. Be one of them olives. I hope this has touched you. If it has, click the like button, the subscribe button, the follow button, the notification button. Give it a little rumble if you're rumbling with us on Rumble. And I hope to see you next time for another episode of the Bible, 1 Year with the Preacher's Husband. We'll see you then.